The focus is communicating with your medical team and loved ones about serious illness. So just to give a little bit of an introduction about what is palliative care, and Eliza and I have experienced throughout our work that there are a lot of misconceptions about what palliative care is. And palliative care is really a specialized medical care that improves the quality of life for patients and their loved ones facing challenges associated with serious illness. And when we think of quality of life, we think of the physical aspect of things, so helping patients managing their symptoms, and then also the psychosocial aspect of it. So whether that's helping patients coping and support, helping caregivers take care of their loved ones who are facing that illness, whatever it may be. The other thing to note about palliative care is that it can be something that patients receive at really any stage of illness. And we've actually found that most effectively is when it's considered early in the course of illness. One of the things that we often find is that when we go to see patients and they hear the term palliative care, their first thought is, am I dying? And the answer is no. And what we found is that patients often get confused between palliative care and hospice. And hospice is really care for patients who are in their final months of life, whereas palliative care can really be at any stage in illness. Eliza and I are part of a team called the Heart Pal team. We're an interprofessional team made up of a doctor, myself, a nurse practitioner, and Eliza, a social worker. And we provide longitudinal palliative care. So that's either when patients are in the hospital. We also have a clinic, and we focus on the care of patients who are living with advanced heart disease. So I'm going to hand over to Eliza, who's going to share our goals for today.
Yeah, so some of our goals for today, I hope the first one we've already accomplished a little bit, which is providing you all with an overview of palliative care and its role in navigating challenges with managing serious illness. We also hope to identify potential barriers to effective communication that you might experience either with your medical team or with your family and loved ones, and give you some tools. So yeah, offer tools for clearly and confidently expressing your worries and wishes related to your medical care, as well as for, just simply starting the conversation, just giving you some tangible things.
So in order to make sure that you're receiving the health care that's in line with your goals at any stage in your illness, it's always important to make sure that you have the information that you need so that you can make the best decisions about your health. Whether this is information from your medical team and also information to share with your family in the event that you're unable to make decisions for yourself, it's really important to make sure that your loved ones have a good sense of your medical issues and also what your wishes would be in the event that you weren't able to express those. In our experience, we found that often patients, don't have a good sense about what to expect in the future. They're often surprised at hearing information, for example, about prognosis. They can often feel frustrated or confused. And we often find that patients aren't really sure how to broach the topic with their family and friends. They don't know how to talk about these things. They don't feel comfortable doing it. So we've divided our talk into two different parts. So the first is talking to your medical team. And we are going to begin with a poll. So the first question, how confident do you feel knowing what questions to ask your providers about your health in the future?
Looks like we have definitely a bit of a mix here. Thank you all for those who participated. It sounds like some of you are feeling pretty confident about it. Some of you somewhat, and then a few not at all. And so I think I hope that wherever you kind of fall on the spectrum, we can give you some tools today to feel a little bit more confident.
And then our second poll question is, how confident do you feel knowing what questions to ask your providers about the health in the future? And it looks here like, again, there's a mix between between the answers. So again, as Eliza said, hopefully be able to help give you some tools to help with some of these conversations. So throughout our work, we've sort of encountered a lot of this. And what we find with patients is that, they have sort of these questions that are unanswered and things that they've been thinking about. We found that patients often, assume that their provider is going to really tell them what they need to know. And so they assume if they haven't heard that information, then they don't need to know it. I think often patients and their loved ones struggle with, what should I ask? What kind of questions should I be asking my medical providers? I think people are often worried. They don't want their providers to think that they don't know what they should know. They're embarrassed about not knowing the information, or they're worried that their providers may think they're stupid. I think sometimes people struggle with, well, what if I don't like the answer that I'm given? And so that gives them, reluctance to ask the question. And I think the other thing that we find a lot is that, patients are worried about taking up too much of their doctor's time. If they're used to coming in for a very quick appointment, they feel bad about kind of taking up too much time. And so when we think about talking to healthcare providers, the way that we sort of think about it is in these 4 different things. So the first thing is who. So when I talk to my healthcare provider, who do I want to be there for that conversation? So is this a conversation that I want to have by myself? Do I want my spouse there? Do I want my children there? And again, this can depend on what the conversation is and can change over different times. But I think that's something to really think about is, who do you want to be there? I think, how do you want to have that conversation? And so, we found that different patients want to know different things, and that sort of ties into the what. So some patients want to know a lot of information. Other patients just want to know the big picture. Some patients, want to know sort of what treatment options are there. They want to hear information about their prognosis. So thinking specifically about what that information is that you're hoping to gather. And then I think the other thing is when to have that conversation. So is this something that you want to have as part of a regular follow-up, or is this something that you feel would be better to have a separate appointment to have and to discuss these things? And these are some examples of phrases that we found and patients have found helpful, things to kind of ask their doctor. So a more general question might be, can you tell me what I might expect from this illness? Sometimes patients like to have a time frame. So, what is my life likely to look like in 6 months from now, a year from now, 5 years from now? We found the best case, worst case approach to be very helpful for a lot of people, especially when, there's a lot of uncertainty. It sort of gives a framework. So what is the best case scenario? What is the worst case scenario? And what is most likely? And that can be a very helpful way to think about things. I think a lot of patients want to know, rather than the details of the medical information, sort of how does this impact me on a practical level? And how is my life going to look like in terms of what I am or not able to do on a practical perspective in the future? And then I think thinking about specific treatment decisions that need to be made. So for example, if I pursue this surgery, what can I expect? And if I don't, what does that look like? And so I think these are, again, just examples, but ways that we found helpful and expressions that we've found that patients find easy to use with their providers. So we're going to do a little bit of role play here. We have a case, which is a made up case using Eliza. And really, this is just to give you an example of sort of how we might incorporate some of these phrases into a conversation. Again, this is not a framework that you have to use, but we wanted to just give you kind of a sense of how you might use these phrases when you are talking about your provider. So Eliza was diagnosed with heart failure in 2018. She was admitted to the hospital for a week at that time. And since then, fortunately, she's been doing very well. She's working full-time as a social worker at Brigham and Women's, which she enjoys very much. And unfortunately, for the last few months, she's been noticing that she's been feeling a little bit under the weather. She's been more tired. She's been having some more shortness of breath. And so Dr. Lewis recommended that she underwent some further testing. Eliza presents to clinic today with Dr. Lewis to discuss the findings of some of these testing. And she has questions for Dr. Lewis about what she might expect in the future.
Hi, Dr. Lewis.
Hi, Eliza. How are you doing?
I'm okay. I felt I felt better. It's not like when I was in the hospital, but I've noticed not feeling as great as I have been, and I'm hoping, and I'm a little nervous, but I'm hoping we can talk a little bit about kind of what you think is going on.
Okay. We've got a few minutes, so
Okay.
what do you want to know?
Okay. Can you, obviously I know I have heart failure. We've kind of talked about it. I know my medications and kind of what I need to be doing. Can you just tell me a little bit about what I might expect from this illness? Kind of some of the things that might be ahead that I might look out for. As you know, I'm already kind of like, I'm feeling more tired lately. I feel like a little more shortness, like a little short of breath when I walk long distances.
Yeah, so your heart muscle is quite weak, and I think you know that. And
Okay.
I'm a little worried that this might be as good as you feel, and that things may be a rocky course in the next 6 to 12 months.
In the next 6 to 12 months, you said? Okay. What do you think, kind of like, is there a way to kind of put this in the best case, worst case, like if things continue to go well, what that might look like, and then if things aren't going so well, what some signs of that might be?
Yeah, so, even when you do everything right, and when I do everything right, heart failure can really have a rocky course, like I said. And so I think best case scenario is, we pay a lot of attention to you. You see me every 6 weeks, 12 weeks.
Yeah.
We adjust your meds, but best case scenario is to be a lot of medication, a lot of doctor visits, a lot of phone calls, weighing yourself every day, watching what you eat. That's best case scenario, and we keep you out of the hospital and able to work.
Okay.
Worst case scenario is that things go in the other direction, and every time you get in the hospital, every time you get worse, you don't take 4 steps back and maybe 2 steps forward, and then you may continue to spiral down and really become quite, unable to work and feeling much worse over the next 6 to 12 months.
Okay. So it sounds like coming to the hospital more often, that might show me that things maybe aren't going in the way I'm hoping they are.
Yes. So when the pills don't work, sometimes we need IVs. We need more procedures, more things like that.
Okay. I haven't really talked to my family much about this. Do you, they know kind of what's going on, but they don't really is it your suggestion that maybe I start to talk to some of my family and just kind of let them know what's going on?
You definitely need to talk to your family.
Okay.
They, even if this turns out to be best case scenario, I think it's important that they know what you're struggling with and what you're concerned about. And that if things do get worse, you want to talk to them while you're strong and healthy, not when you're gasping for air and very sick in the hospital. So yeah, and if you want to have a conversation with me there, if that would make it easier, we can do that too.
Okay. I think that's all of my questions for now. I'm sure I'll see you again soon. Thank you for your time and just kind of at least starting this conversation. That wasn't necessarily something I wanted to, I don't know. It's just helpful to hear a little bit of background. So thank you.
Well, I appreciate you bringing it up. And if you want to dedicate a visit just for a conversation like this, that might make more sense, because otherwise, there's always a time pressure, at the end of a visit to cram it in and talk about your meds and talk about the medical stuff. So
yeah. Okay. All right. I'll think of some more questions and then maybe schedule a follow-up with you for sooner rather than later.
Okay, Eliza.
Okay. Thank you.
So end scene, and I just want to add that as the doctor there, I think probably the 2 biggest obstacles for doctors are time. And so sometimes it really is important to make a separate dedicated visit just to talk about this and to bring whatever family members you want there. I love having family members there. I think it really helps so that everybody has the same conversation and hears the same thing at the same time. And the second obstacle is doctors often don't bring this up because they don't want to be the one to bring it up because they're afraid they're going to scare the patient or remove hope. And so for me to have a patient bring it up is really quite welcome. And I know not all doctors feel that way and not all doctors are the same, but I think for the most part, if doctors feel uncomfortable with it, it's because they feel like it ought to come from the patient rather than from the doctor, which isn't really true, but it is just honestly how many doctors feel.
So thank you, Dr. Lewis, for that. And yeah, I think even in a role play situation, I think it can feel a little bit intimidating at first to think, like, to even find your footing in that, like, what's okay to ask, how much emotional reserve do I have for this conversation, as well as how much time do we have. And so I think knowing that it doesn't need to be, if you bring it up with your doctor, it doesn't need to be the only conversation you have. It can be the first of many. But I hope that demonstration gave you a little bit of just like what's an entry point that I might use. And so again, thanks, Dr. Lewis. And now we wanted to transition a little bit to talking to your loved ones. And as we know, that, can be a lot easier said than done. And as in my case, I was someone who maybe hadn't really talked to their family that much yet about what was going on and that things have been kind of going okay, but I was thinking, okay, maybe it's time. So we wanted to re-engage our audience again and get a sense of, like, from this end, how are things feeling? Just take the temperature. So first question, how comfortable do you feel including your family in discussions about your health? Give it a little more time. All right. So it looks, again, we have a mix. Some of you feel, I apologize, I can't see exactly what the audience is seeing from our end, but I'm seeing that some of you feel really comfortable. Some of you not very, a lot of somewhats, and then a couple not at all. And so again, I hope that we can give you all a little bit of tools, and we'd love to, again, we're going to save some time at the end, and I really would love to hear from any and all of you about kind of what are the challenges, and then also, are there things that you have found helpful? Next question would be, how confident do you feel that your loved ones would know your wishes in the event that you were unable to make decisions for yourself? So this is a little bit harder of a question, but more, if you were to get so sick, how confident do you feel that your loved ones would know what you would want? So I think we're still waiting for some answers to come in. Maybe Allie, could you let me know when okay, so we have 100% answered. Okay, so I'm glad to see none of you said not at all. I think that's huge. And that kind of speaks to the conversations that you've already had with your loved ones. And I'm glad to hear it. And also, it sounds like there's still a mix of kind of, well, not exactly sure. Again, some very confident, some more not very, or somewhat. Okay. So before we kind of talk about kind of how we do this, I think it's important to talk about what are the common worries that come up, at least for me and Natasha from our end. And you can let us know in the Q&A after if this is kind of on target or not. But a lot of the things that we hear from our patients and their families, first starting with patient worries, will I upset my family? Will they think that I'm giving up if I bring up that I'm worried or have questions? There's often, especially in the hospital, it can be a hard place, but also in the outpatient setting, a kind of feeling of I don't want to go there. Kind of speaking to, I think, what I mentioned earlier about the emotional load that you are feeling able to kind of take on, or I think a lot of people also fear too, if we unearth this, or if we kind of bring this into light, can we contain it? Can we kind of keep it? Can it stay in its box, so to speak? And then a lot of people tell us, I need my family or my loved ones to see me as strong. And I hope we'll talk a little bit more about this, but a lot of people worry that having worries or having anxieties makes them seem less strong, when really that, I think, is not the case. We can be strong, and we can have genuine questions about what might be ahead. From our families, and when we say families, we mean, whatever the family or loved one or support network looks like to you. We know that families come in all, shapes and sizes. So this is more just for the ease of terms. But from family, what we hear often is, will I upset so-and-so if I bring this up? If I ask questions, will it make them think I'm not hopeful about their future? And often we hear, I don't want X to see that I'm upset or I'm worried, I'm anxious. I have to keep it together. I have to be the rock. And so why do we talk about it? Why are Natasha and I pushing you to have these conversations? I think research has showed us that these kind of advanced care planning conversations help patients and family members to feel more aligned on important decisions, thus reducing anxiety and mitigating potential negative effects, be it, health-wise, mental health-wise, tension between loved ones. We really, you're holding your fears, your wants and worries on one end. Your loved ones might be holding their fears, worries, wants on the other, and you're both kind of not wanting to upset each other. You're wanting to protect each other. But what we found is actually when we're able to come together using tools that feel manageable and doable, it increases a sense of connection, a sense of reassurance, and a sense of confidence. So starting the conversation, again, our goal is to give you some entry points, acknowledging fully that you are your own people and in your own family systems. We just want to, give you some tools if it's helpful to start getting your footing. What we first recommend is similar to when you're thinking about talking to your providers, setting the stage. So taking a personal inquiry of what feels most important to you, what would you want your family and your loved ones to know, and who should or should not be a part of the conversation. And then, so you'll see this in some of our resources. We use the Conversation Project a lot. A lot of our work and research comes from there. Simple. Okay, hey, can you and I have a conversation about blank? Also, like sometimes using another family member or a shared history of, a friend or someone else that can be a helpful entry point. So, for example, I was thinking about what happened to grandma, and it made me realize that I would never want to, for example, live in a nursing home, or I would never, I'm not sure I would want to be in a situation where I couldn't garden, so to speak. So it can be anything like that. Another one I really like is, even though I'm okay right now, I'm worried that, something could happen and I want to be prepared. Can we talk about some of the things that matter to me? I think all of these kind of carve out some space and make some room for it to be, it acknowledges the importance of the conversation and also kind of gives it some parameters as well. So some topics we might cover are general health related worries about, specific illnesses. As you saw when I went to Dr. Lewis, I was worried about, my heart failure and knew that was my specific diagnosis, but didn't know much about, what might be ahead. And so you may want to relay that to your family. Whether there are any legal and financial preferences or arrangements that you have either made or need help making, or you're not there yet, but you just want someone to know just in case something were to happen. Who you want or do not want involved in decisions about your care, both exist. Important life events or dates that might factor into your decision making. You know, Natasha and I hear from a lot of people that, you know, maybe they wouldn't want to go through something long term, but damn it, do they want to make their daughter's wedding? You know, or, you know, there are sometimes those things do play a role. Medical interventions that you may or may not want, and or any hard lines regarding your quality of life. That's not to say that you should or have to know what you want right now, but more if those hard lines exist for you, which of them are important for your family to know. You know, some people say, hey, if I'm not able to walk, run, talk, play with my grandchildren, like I would not want to be kept alive on a ventilator. And that, again, that's an extreme example. But I think it's helpful for your family to know kind of early and often, are there things that really you would have trouble imagining for yourself? And I think it's also a very important caveat to note that these conversations can change and evolve, and your hard lines that you might have now might change and evolve. And so just as this is not the one and done conversation with your provider, this is also not a one and done conversation with your family. And these things can certainly change as your illness progresses, as you adjust to new things, as you try new medications. There's so many different factors. So I don't want any of you to feel like this is if you have this conversation, it's set in stone. It's more a living, breathing thing that can exist between the two, between you and your family. Tash, do you want to introduce our next little role play?
So this is part 2. So Eliza has returned from her visit with Dr. Lewis, and she's hoping to speak with her sister, me, Natasha, also her healthcare proxy, about the outcome of her visit, and wanted to share some of the things that were important to her.
Hey, Natasha.
Hi, how are you? How did it go today?
It went well. I actually wanted to see if it's okay if, you know, you and I can have a conversation actually about kind of my conversation with Dr. Lewis.
Should I be worried? Should I call the others or?
No. I appreciate that. I'm okay right now. I feel like we have a good plan. She's adjusting my medications where, you know, I think I don't need to be in the hospital or anything. I'm just, I wanted to talk about some things, and I want to make sure that you feel comfortable kind of with this. And would that be okay?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. And as much as I love Mom, as much as I love, you know, our family, I think right now that would be a little overwhelming for me. Okay. And I want to make sure you know, like, I've appointed you as my healthcare proxy. Do you know what that is? I realized I didn't talk about that with you.
Yeah, I remember you mentioning it, and I think it's if you couldn't make decisions, I would be making decisions on your behalf. Is that right? And I assume that was because, you know, we spend the most amount of time together, and like, you know, I feel like we understand each other pretty well.
Yeah, I feel like you know me pretty well, and you know what I like and what I don't like, and I just feel like you could kind of be in that position in a way that I like couldn't imagine Mom. So as I mentioned, like, I'm okay, but she did mention that, you know, she reminded me that, you know, heart failure is progressive, and, you know, that things could, you know, as I think I mentioned, that I've been like a little more tired lately, that I've been a little bit more fatigued and more shortness of breath. And she kind of shared, like, we hope not, but like, this could be as good as you feel.
That's
Which
scary. Were you prepared for that? I didn't ever really.
You know, I hadn't really let myself like think too much about what might be ahead, but I realized like I needed to ask her, and it was actually really, like, I felt relieved that I did. So, and again, I feel like we have a good plan, but I just kind of wanted to make sure you kind of knew, like, first of all, that you knew that you were my healthcare proxy, and then also just to kind of let you know that I'm going to schedule a follow-up visit with her. To like talk a little bit more. because I am feeling still a little like, okay, well, what is that? Do I just sit and wait until, I'm not exactly sure, but
and is it okay if I come to that appointment with you just so I can hear? Because it feels like kind of understanding that might be helpful for me and, helping to support you through it. Is that?
Yeah, I think that would be really helpful to me. And as long as you feel comfortable with that, just because I kind of want someone else to hear too, like what I might need to do. Like if the medication, like she kind of shared with me that, we hope that the medications will continue to work and that I can stay out of the hospital and do everything I want to do. But that if they don't work and that I'm like admitted to the hospital more, that it might be a sign that like things aren't going well. And I don't really know then what my options are from there. And so I think having, as you know, like I can get pretty anxious. And so I think having someone else hear it will be helpful.
Well, it's really a relief that you're sharing that with me, because I know you're pretty private about some of these things, but I'm glad that you feel able. I didn't want to bring it up, but I have noticed that you haven't really been the same as usual, and I've been worried about you.
Okay. I'm sorry that I've kept you in the dark, but I'm glad to kind of give you an update now. Okay. I'll let you know when I'm meeting with her next and see if you can come.
I'm always here for you, and whatever I can do, I'm always here.
Thanks, Josh. And see. I wish you were my sister in your life and my healthcare proxy. That would be very reassuring. So I think if we can get back to the slides, that'd be great. So again, I think that in no way was a comprehensive conversation, but I think what I really wanted to show was just starting the conversation of making sure she knew her role on my team and kind of where I was in my processing. And again, look forward to hearing any and all reflections that you have. Natasha and we're sending this all to you guys via kind of a care package, so to speak, of just some of the tools that we use frequently in our work. Tosh, I'm not sure, since it's your screen, if you're able to click on the links, but we just wanted to show you, if we can, some of the documents that we tend to recommend to our patients. The first one being the conversation project, where we base a lot of our work in some of the phrases that we have used. If the links aren't working, that's okay. We can kind of speed past it. And again, you will have all of these resources. And if you have any questions, you're welcome to contact us. The conversation project has some starting points, as we shared, as well as some, oh, there we go. You just had it. Yeah, so there's, if you go to the Get Started tab, sorry, Tosh, that this was put on you. If you go to the Get Started tab up there, there's some, guides about starting a conversation, choosing a healthcare proxy, some downloadable things that you can use, your guide for talking with a healthcare team. So definitely recommend taking a further look at this. I also like that they have some workbooks, which are really kind of, when we were talking about that personal inventory about kind of how do I even want to approach these conversations? What do I want to know? What do I not want to know? They have some things like that. And then specific resources, related to Alzheimer's or dementia for caregivers of children. And so we love that. Another one was actually given to us by, Tosh, maybe you can explain this one.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a guide that was given to us by a surgeon who's interested in communication and improving the care of patients. And this is specifically made for patients who are considering whether to undergo surgery. And so these are some of the questions that you can bring to your surgeon. So, similar to kind of what we discussed before, some of the more general things, and then, specifics of sort of practically what does that look like, and sort of best and worst case scenarios. So we found this to be quite helpful, specifically for patients undergoing surgery.
5 Wishes is one that you may have heard of. I think it's gaining traction in Massachusetts. We're one of the states that legally acknowledges it as a valid form of, advanced care planning. we are sending, the link might not show the actual document, but as part of the care package, we're sending you the document, and it's a pretty comprehensive. I think if you look at the sample down underneath, you can look at a sample of it if you go back. But it really is kind of speaking more to that personal inventory of, thinking about, yeah, perfect. So this is what it looks like. The one we're sending you doesn't have sample written across from it, but kind of, it might be more advanced for, it might feel like too much right now, but it's something to have in your back pocket. If it feels like if a healthcare proxy doesn't do it, or you have a big family, or it's just important to you that you have, details kind of written out about what's important to you. So wish one, who should be making decisions. So that's, your healthcare proxy. Wish two would be my wish for the kind of medical treatment I want or don't want. Wish three, my wish for how comfortable I want to be. So this is particularly related to pain management and what you are and are not, what you would not be comfortable with. And then wish four, my wish for how I would want people to treat me. Cross out anything that you don't agree with. And again, this might be too much detail for some. Others find it really comforting to have at least a starting point like this. And if anything else, even if you don't use it as a part of like a legal document, it can at least be a really helpful exercise in kind of going through your family or your loved ones, or your provider. Some of the things that even you might start to think about that maybe you hadn't thought about before. Wish five being my wish for what I would want my loved ones to know. So that is, again, this is one of our favorites. And then this last one, it's called Cake, and it might be a little bit more out there for people, but it's advanced care and end of life planning kind of hub online where you can make an account. You can talk about your will and your estate planning, life assurance, power of attorney. I've made an account to see what it's like. It's actually kind of fun, in a strange way. You can talk about, you can get as specific or be as basic as you want, but I like the fact that you can kind of keep all of the forms in an online space, and you can give your proxy or whoever you would want access to your account, and you can invite them securely over email. I wanted to show you my account, but I think we'll save that. And again, those are just a starting point, just to get your feet wet, and hopefully a little bit of variety in terms of like how deep or how not deep, how shallow you would like to stay. And I think now we are at a point where we would really love to open it up to the audience to hear what you guys are thinking and how this has been sitting with you.
So please feel free to join us through the chat or the Q&A to enter your comments and questions. And I think we've got one already from Dr. Bilchik, who has said, this is a wonderful discussion. Critical to have the discussion before a crisis. It's never too soon. And this requires a good conversation, requires a relationship with your provider. Who's the right person to have this conversation with? Would it be your primary care doctor, your specialist, whether it's your cardiologist, your oncologist? And how do you do this in an environment where there is never enough time? And how do we get people like you? So suppose the doctor is a good person to talk with, but perhaps also it would be wonderful to have a trained palliative care social worker or a nurse practitioner. Where do we find people to have this conversation with?
Eliza, do you want to, or should I? You want me to?
You speak to your end, and then I can chime in.
So I think, it's something that we think about, and I think more and more people have a lot of specialty providers. So we often meet patients who have a cardiologist, a nephrologist, a primary care, and so they can feel varying levels of degree of comfortableness sort of talking to the provider. And I think that for some people, they've been with the same primary care provider for many years, and so having that conversation with them makes more sense. For others, if it's specific questions related to, for example, if they're thinking about, do I need dialysis, then having that conversation with their nephrologist. I think a lot of what Eliza and I do is sort of try and create opportunities for all providers to be there at the same time. And especially now, and having easy access to Zoom and things like that, sort of having these meetings with all providers involved. Because I think one of the most important things is to make sure that all your providers are giving you the same information and that everyone's on the same page. And so having that opportunity to have those conversations with everyone there where possible, we found to be really helpful. And I think setting aside a specific time in order to have these conversations can mitigate the anxiety of, worrying about taking up people's time. And it also gives you time to kind of prepare for that conversation and write down a list of questions, and gives your providers time to sort of think about it, take a step back and look at where things are at in terms of the overall care.
Yeah, and I will add, please speak up for yourselves and request, if your team doesn't, if you find yourself hospitalized and your team doesn't suggest it, most hospitals in the area have a palliative care service that is dedicated and can come and help the team with these conversations, not only in consulting on your pain and symptoms and making sure you're feeling as well as you can, but also really trying to put some of those pieces together and kind of addressing the bigger picture questions. And exactly what Natasha said, kind of making sure that, the different specialists who are all so focused on their particular area are kind of, even if they have a different input, we're kind of integrating the information. And then I'll also add that most VNAs, or a lot of the visiting nurse agencies in the area, have a palliative care arm now, or a consultation service. And so that's something where, even if it kind of felt like, okay, in my doctor's specific office there isn't that service, you can request a palliative care consultation from a visiting nurse who could come and meet you actually in your home and in the community and get a sense of like your daily living. And that, we'd be happy to talk a little bit more about specific agencies, or, if you had questions about, hey, where do I turn? We're happy to, feel free to contact us.
That is just such a nice overview. So I just wanted to jump in here and say thank you to both of you, because I think you have just covered the gamut, so many different topics and emotions. And I think, we could probably spend an hour really diving in deep on some of these subsets, because there really just is so many things to talk about. I just wanted to offer a little bit of my perspective, because so much of, I think, getting the team involved is following an acute hospitalization or an episode of acute care, right? And I think we do acute care, right, in the US really well. What we don't do really well is that chronic, longitudinal, right, defining our goals and understanding kind of the peaks and valleys when you do have a diagnosis of a chronic condition. And unfortunately, as I think Dara and Brian will attest to as well, most of what we see as cardiologists is chronic disease, right? And while we are very optimistic about helping people feel better and coming up with a treatment plan, we usually aren't curing things, right? I mean, you usually don't graduate from heart failure or AFib or coronary disease, right? We're just keeping things stable. And part of that is having those discussions early on about what your specific goals are. And I think, in many ways, if we do our jobs correctly, we're really modeling, these lessons that you both have brought up today about defining what our quality of life goals really are, right? Because I think we could make the argument that most of medicine should really be, the definition of palliative care, really focusing on those values that are important to each of us. So, so thank you for kind of widening the forum that we can talk about all these details. I don't know if my colleagues have any other thoughts, or I can
I do.
keep going with some questions.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Great. So thank you so much. It's such a journey. And we all get stuck with the nomenclature, and there's so many people who are concerned about this notion of palliative care and hospice care and end of life kind of caring. And it's really interesting because the paradigm is shifting. And I think biggest surprise to us is how relieved people are when they can actually have this conversation. And there's no right or wrong way to do it, but you just got to do it. You don't want to wait for a crisis and the most junior people who have never met you ever before in the hospital setting, in the time of an emergency room or so, are asking you questions that you've never heard before. So it's really important. And what's interesting about this, and I think Natasha and Eliza did a great job with the role play, as awkward as that can be, is that there is a sense of relief that you can actually have that discussion, because people know when people are sick. And they can tell when people are deteriorating and declining. And it was an interesting lesson for us when Dr. Tom Greyboys, who, one of the founders of the Lown Cardiovascular Group, finally admitted he was sick and dying. And he had Lewy body dementia and all these complications of Parkinsonism. And when he finally admitted it, he actually the buoyancy, the vibrancy of his and quality of life really improved, because there was a relief. And so really my only point is, have the conversation. You'll be surprised at how receptive people are. There's no right or wrong time to do it. Just the only wrong thing is not having it and waiting till a crisis to form. And it's just about planning. And I think we're all in this kind of mode with COVID-19 and breaking news and all the politics, that we're all kind of focused in on the external of what's going on around us. And I think this is a time to really think about yourselves personally. What are your wishes? What are your needs? And I think we've all had that time to think about these things in a little bit more of a thoughtful way. So that's my point, and I just wanted to thank you so much.
I think just to add on to, I thank you so much also for inviting us to speak today. I think, we always tell patients that having these conversations don't make these things happen. So thinking about worst case scenarios doesn't mean that because we're talking about it, it's going to happen. And I think that having these conversations when you are doing well and you're seeing your provider in the outpatient setting are the best time, because when you're in a crisis situation, there are a lot of emotions involved. It's very hard to think about it. And so we always kind of approach everything as hoping for the best and preparing for the what ifs. And so, we always hope for the best. And I think giving that time and that space to think about worst case scenarios can actually be really helpful. And we found that, some of our most helpful interactions with the patients have actually been in the outpatient setting. And so when they're coming in for a regular appointment and really just getting a sense of sort of where are you at? And I think, in palliative care, it's sort of helping people live as well as possible for as long as possible. And so that can be in a number of different ways. But, as everyone's mentioned today, that really having these conversations up front and early on, even at the time of diagnosis of a new illness, any change in your medical status can be really helpful.
And I think it's really important because you mentioned that none of it is set in stone. And if you have the conversation early on, and you say, of course, I would want a breathing tube. Of course, I would want this. And then 6 months, 12 months, a year later, you might feel very differently, or vice versa, right? So you can say how you feel at that moment and get the thoughts flowing and the words flowing. And then you might walk into the ER and say, I changed my mind. I do want a breathing tube. And that's okay too, right? But letting people know how you feel so that the people close to you can speak for you if you can't speak for yourself. And whether that's your sister, your doctor, whoever that might be, that's so important.
And I think just to add to, oftentimes one of the things I hear from family members is like, I don't know what to do. I don't know what I can do. And sometimes it's such an act of kindness from patients to the person going through it to say like, look, I don't need you to, to make meals for me or to like make this all better because I know you can't fix it, but actually allowing someone to be there for you in a way that feels genuine and real and comfortable for you, that does help reduce anxiety and allows your loved ones to be there for you in a way that feels genuine. And it's you not holding it alone too. And we see that with a lot of people as the relief. I think that Dr. Bilchik, you had spoken to of the relief of just kind of opening that gasket a little bit, not to live in that space, not to assume like, okay, the worst is happening, but to allow your providers and your loved ones a chance to kind of be there for you too, that can be a really good feeling.
And I think that is a real gift to your family or to your friends, that you actually have given them that insight before they're called on, right? And sometimes we don't see that until after the fact, but it really is very, very generous. I wrote down a few buzzwords that came through my mind while you both were talking, and I'm just going to throw them out there because I would love to hear how you think about things and how you help guide patients. So the idea of dependency versus support, defining the role of caregivers and what that means, how we perceive autonomy as one of our kind of quality of life metrics, and how we really define, what our priorities are, and whether that's for, the next 3 months versus the next few years. So I know that's a lot to unpack, but those were all things that, I think are just floating in the atmosphere. So if anybody wants to help those materialize a little bit.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, thank you. Those are really important, and it's great to kind of get that flavor from the talk as well. Is like, what are next steps? Just wanted to throw something out there about from the provider perspective. And clinicians, physicians, providers are really not trained in this. And I think the paradigm is shifting, and we're starting to learn a lot more how to have these discussions. At the Lown Cardiology Group, we all got trained in the conversation project, and it was quite a learning curve for us because we all thought we knew how to do this, and we learned a lot from that training. And it's not easy to do this well, I would say. And it took a fair amount of practice and role playing for us as providers to get this at least better. But I think what was interesting about the process for us was it instilled this kind of need to have this discussion and to initiate it, even in a fairly trivial way initially, and then in a formal way. But I just think the expectation on providers, we're very well trained in having these discussions. And so, but I think it's worth pushing people because everyone wants to do the right thing and everyone's well-intended generally. Time is obviously a big resource that is really scarce these days, but I think it's important. I think we as providers are learning. I think for us to have resources that we can refer out to and have discussions with other people who are, more familiar with this. But I think be patient with your providers, and if they say something that is, that kind of upsets you or something, just give them a little bit of space to, process this as well, because some people are not kind of prepared. So we can prepare our patients, but we also have to prepare our providers to have these discussions.
Thank you for that, Dr. Bilchik. And I think, if I may, the one piece of advice that I would give to providers who are not quite sure about this is ask permission first. I think for a lot of patients, especially when they're in the hospital and they're not feeling well, I think one of a great way to kind of set the stage and see if it's even a good time is, hey, I wonder, this is on my mind. I wonder if this is on your mind. Would now be a good time to talk a little bit about it, or would it feel okay? And that way you can kind of negotiate those terms together. I did want to kind of speak to your point, Dr. Kelley-Hedgepeth, about autonomy. There are a lot of things that, like all of the buzzwords you shared, those are very important. I think the reason the word autonomy stuck out to me is a lot of people tell us, like, if I can't be independent, that's not, like, my independence is so important to me. And I think just as we've seen, these conversations can shift and evolve, the idea of autonomy can also shift and evolve, and what it might look like might be a little bit different based on the symptoms that you're feeling, based on the, kind of where things are with your illness. And a lot of people actually find, like, things that they thought they would never find tolerable, like using a walker or having a home health aide or things like that, when we talk about, like when we take the steps to take this personal inventory and think about where things are with my illness, what might be ahead, what's important to me, what is the best case, worst case scenario, a lot of times people kind of come to this realization that like, oh, you know what, if it means staying home and being safe and being around longer for my family or being able to make it to XY event, okay, I'd be willing to have a home health aide come in, like as long as I like her. So things that maybe once seem, the idea of autonomy can shift, and some people are actually really willing to accept a little bit more help, even though that challenges kind of the strict definition of independence. There's the difference between independence and autonomy. And so that is one of the many kind of thoughts I was having in responses to some of the buzzwords you brought up.
I think that brings up just what a process it is, right? And kind of going, and that's why it's so worthwhile going through this mental exercise, right? As you're processing what it means to have a chronic disease, right? And how that's going to play out. I mean, the other thing too is people usually feel the worst after an acute hospitalization, right? And things typically, you know, not all the time, but a lot of the time they settle out and people then do better again. And, you know, a matter of months, your outlook looks, you know, I think very different. Your day-to-day might look very different. So I think it is important to have that kind of longitudinal process in our thinking.
I think also I was just reflecting on how, you know, at different stages in illness, we often meet patients who have been fiercely independent their whole lives. They go to appointments by themselves, they manage their medications, and sort of asking a family member or a loved one to come with them feels like, you know, they're acknowledging that things are getting worse. And I think that, you know, we always encourage different people to do what they need, but just to acknowledge that asking family to be involved or sharing information with family, you know, doesn't necessarily indicate that things are getting worse. It may just be that you need more support. And sometimes in order to try and, you know, maintain independence for as long as possible, you do need that support. And so part of the role in our job is that we support patients and also their caregivers, because illness affects not just the patient, but their entire family and the environment that they live in. And so I think that's also important to recognize as well.
It's so important. And I do want to add too that the gift and the generosity of asking, allowing, inviting a family member to help in your care is important. As the daughter of parents who both passed, it was nothing more than wonderful to be able to take them to an appointment, to be able to give back some of what they had given me. I think as people get older, they say, I don't want to be a burden on my children. But what's a burden in your eyes may not be a burden to your kids. And so I think that authentic connection, that authentic relationship, that vulnerability may not be who you saw yourself as a younger person, and it may be the reality now. But I agree, just redefining what that is something that you can't overestimate what a gift it is to an adult child to allow them to help pay back some of what you have given them your whole life.
Well, I think that's probably a lovely note to end on. And I think following the webinar today, we'll send out a survey, which of course we will appreciate if everybody responds to, and also some attachments, which we've named the care package, with some lovely examples that we showed you, but we'll really give concrete examples of how to kind of walk through this with your family members, which I think is very helpful for all of us to look at and to think about. And so on that note, I'd like to thank everybody for joining us. Certainly thank Eliza and Natasha for a wonderful conversation, and to everyone that's in the audience. And we will be again joining you next month, October 20th. And the topic of conversation is how the environment affects us day to day. So mark your calendars and please join us for that. Thank you all again.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.